descriptions of what biases are there. Sorry, something just popped on my screen there. So if we look at bias, as it says from the Oxford Dictionary, an inclination or a prejudice for or against a person or a group, especially in a way considered to be unfair, often supporting or opposing a particular person or thing in an unfair way by allowing personal opinions to influence your judgment, the Cambridge Dictionary. And I think what's important to understand is that we have both negative and positive forms of bias. We also have the same with unconscious bias as well. That thing that we can't really control, but it does impact on our behaviours at times. So it's really important that we kind of recognise this as professionals. Where do these biases come from then is often a question. Sorry, I've got something right in the middle of my screen. There, it's gone, Simone. Where do these biases come from? Well, they come from our backgrounds, our histories, our areas that we live in, our family units and such. There was an article written, an old article written back in 1975 by author Selma Freilberg. Nursery. Has anyone come across the article of Ghosts in the Nursery? I think it's a really, really important article. I'll just kind of pop up this on the screen there. It's a really important article, and there's been a lot more work done on the back of this article. Oh, Karen has seen it there. There's been a lot more work done on the back of this article, but as you can see, it's a psychoanalytical approach to problems of impaired infant-mother relationships and such. And what this article goes on and talks about is, it's not talking about actual spirits and things in the nursery. What it's talking about is behaviours that are passed down generationally. So who are we sitting here? Well, I'm the product of my great grandparents and such. Have I met them? No, I've never met them. But the behaviours that have been passed down to their children and from their children to their children are always passed down. These can be positive behaviours, but also negative behaviours as well. And what Ghosts in the Nursery really looks at is those abusive kind of behaviours and such that children pick up on and are passed down. For me, when I was a boy growing up, I'll get rid of that picture there. I lived in a home in the West End of Newcastle. It was a socially deprived area, and there was an awful lot of domestic abuse in the family home when I was a boy growing up. And a lot of those behaviours I picked up on. As a boy, I was a horrible child, an absolutely awful child, quite misogynistic, abusive, and these were behaviours that I had picked up from my dad at the time. But I always kind of recall from a very, very young age telling people I wanted to be nothing like my dad. I don't want to be anything like him. I don't want to resemble him. I don't want to have the same behaviours, anything like that. But it would have been very easy to continue that. One of the biggest things that happened in my life to change my outcomes was a youth worker who came into my life, a guy called Steve Howlett, and he really challenged me on some of my views at the perfect time, actually, during adolescence. And he challenged some of my thinking. And I think if it hadn't been for Steve, I would probably be, good chance I would have been in prison and not a qualified mental health nurse. And our roles can have such an impact on the people that we're working with, all the way through childhood and through to adulthood as well. We can impact on those lives. But the article is an excellent article. You can find it quite easily on Google now, and I think it's actually on Google, open article on Google now. So yeah, these biases and unconscious biases, we need to be become aware of them in our practice, and how can we change these things in our practice so that we have better understanding and better relationships with the clients that we're working with. So just to kind of go on from there, folks, what I want to do now is the next slide that I put up, I'm going to pop on a number of pictures onto the screen. And what I would like is to do, with each picture, there's a number. I want you to as quickly as possible, that first instance reaction, who would you like to sit next to? Will be the first question. And if you would put the number in the chat function, that would be great. And then who would you not like to sit next to is the next one that I would like to ask you. And we can put that in the chat function as well. So here come the pictures, guys. So put your responses in the chat. Who would you like to sit next to? Hopefully I get to see some numbers come in the chat function. Number 4, 11. Got 2. I can see, there we go, 11, 1, 4, 4, 5, 11, 12 and 1. I get that. 3. So, can I ask, why did people say that person they wanted to sit next to? If anyone's brave enough, put your hand up and pop your microphone and tell us why you wanted to sit next to this person, first and foremost. Come on, who's going to be brave? Come on then, Catherine.
Hi, I picked number 12 because she's got a nice smile on her face, which looks quite bubbly, and yeah, would be quite friendly and approachable.
Brilliant. Just out of curiosity, who did you choose not to sit next to, Catherine?
Number 1, sorry, I put it next to each other. Number 1, because I thought he might be a bit overbearing.
Right? No, cool. That's great. Angela?
I picked number 4 because he just looks really cheerful, joyful, and happy. So
Yeah.
I'd sit next to him, and I wouldn't sit next to number 7 because he looks extremely angry.
Yeah, and obviously I've kind of tried to play tricks on people, and I've put people who with big smiley faces and some people who are kind of frowning there, but I'll explain what I'm doing in a second. Karen?
I picked number 1 because I thought he looked interesting and fun.
Yeah, doesn't he? Looks like a happy guy,
Yeah.
that you could have a good laugh with him. And who did you choose not to sit next to?
Number 9.
Number 9. Which one was number 9? Why?
Because I don't like him.
Do you know who he is?
Yeah. I
Tell
don't like
everybody
him
who
from
he is then.
TV and who he is, yeah.
Tell everyone who he is.
I can't remember, what was his name now? I can't
Andrew
remember.
Tate.
Andrew Tate. How could I forget? Yeah.
So
I have an
number 9
unconscious
is
bias.
Andrew. Yeah, number 9 is Andrew Tate. Did anyone say anybody else there? So Conchita Wurst is the Eurovision Song Contest winner. Wayne Couzens, the murderer of Sarah Everard. Somebody I saw chose number 3. This is Savannah Brockhill, the murderer of Star Hobson. And number 10, Tommy Robinson. Sometimes we can have these snap decisions, and we have to be careful of our both our biases and our unconscious biases. Not quite so clear who a person is, what their personality is, and whether we're going to like them or not. We have to be careful about some of those judgments, and I think it's important to kind of have that kind of second to think about. Hold on, I'm just looking at some of these bottom ones. Number 1 looks fun. Number 3 has a lovely smile, Simone. Yeah. Change that. I wouldn't sit next to number 9. Ditto with number 10. Fantastic. So yeah, it's giving yourself that moment to just, am I being biased here, or should I just sit next to this person and see who they are as a person? Brilliant, thank you. So everyone has unconscious bias. Importantly to recognize that we're only human, and we have to recognize that. But within our teams, and this is something I want you to challenge within your teams as well, are there potentially any biases or unconscious biases within the team? So I don't know if any of you knew, but when it comes to unconscious bias, 60% of CEOs are over 6 foot tall. Did anybody kind of know that? 60% of CEOs are over 6 foot tall. Our choices favour our dominant side. So if you're right-handed, you will tend to go for the things on the shopping rail on your right-hand side and such, and direct towards the right-hand side. When teachers ask questions, they're more likely to ask boys. And that one makes total sense to me because of our culture, and it's been very much male dominated for centuries, hasn't it? Car salesmen favour white men, white women, black men in that order. It's quite bizarre why that's kind of happening. English names on CVs are 50% more likely to get an interview than in non-English names. 51% of HR professionals are biased against overweight women. It's quite staggering to find out some of these stats. 37% of HR professionals are biased against men. Now, I wonder if that's a positive bias towards them, to men maybe. So it's kind of analysing some of these things. Interview candidates who sat next to overweight people were treated less positively. So is that kind of bias by association because you're next to this person? Very interesting stats. So, and the last one, different accents result in factual information being less trusted. For me, never trusted Angela McAllister, just a funny accent. I'm kidding, Angela. It's a lovely Cumbrian accent. I love the Cumbrian accent. So, looking at service user relationships, how does unconscious bias then potentially impact our relationships with the clients that we work with? What are people's thoughts? Any thoughts on this? I've got some examples, but I want to kind of pick your brains around this one. You can either talk to us or you can put some things in the chat if you like. But don't add time to the day. None. I get very comfortable doing long uncomfortable moments. Yeah, start making assumptions before you meet them. Yeah, absolutely. What we can often see around these situations, you'll see it with teachers a lot and professionals as well. When you get peers coming into a school, for example, that brown child, and then the younger brown sibling comes in, and maybe the older brown sibling was a troublesome child and the younger child has been associated with them, and we can do that sometimes. There can be biases or unconscious biases towards postcodes as well. Do we see unconscious bias towards postcodes and things, folks? I think we see it within safeguarding all the time. Because we tend, to look at some postcodes more negatively than the more affluent postcodes and such as well. But when we look at relationships, our behaviour can change if we have these unconscious biases. We can start to avoid the person that we're working with, have less eye contact with them, shorter communication, smile less, listen less, slower to follow up. And if we look at their behaviour, it actually encourages more hostility, more likely to have complaints against us and the service, reduced cooperation from this person that we're working with, negative body language, entrenched positions as well. So what I'm getting at here, guys, is we're making our jobs harder if we don't deal with these unconscious biases. This is just causing us more paperwork, more time spending with that person, when we can make our jobs a lot easier. Does this make sense to folks? I kind of hope it does. So some bias busting tips that I've put up here. Look for examples that contradict your own personal biases or within your team. Take your time with people decisions, as I said earlier on, and be inquisitive about people who are different from us. What can we learn about this person that will help us to understand who this person is and what their personality is, because we don't want to make those kind of assumptions about the person. One of the best ways to do this within teams, guys, and I would like us to take this back into your teams, is to do an implicit association test within your teams, just to see if anyone within your team has any biases there. Can create discrimination, treating people differently, not giving people the same opportunities as others, and unduly influencing. Absolutely, Helen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put two names up on the screen for you now. And I'm going to put a third word up a second or two later, and I want you to associate that name with one of the first two words that I put up there. Okay, now I don't know Cumbria very well, guys, so I've got this advice from somebody else, so hopefully you'll be able to kind of you'll recognize this better than I will. But as quickly as possible, I want you to try and associate the third word with these two other words. And if you wouldn't mind telling us in the chat function, which one did you associate it with? So we have Windermere or Clittermore. Hopefully you guys know these places. I don't. And we have abuse. Which one would you maybe associate abuse with more? Clittermore, Clittermore, Clittermore. Oh, so you know that these areas, and I'm thinking that Clittermore is probably more socially deprived kind of area. Yeah, and we can have these biases about places, about families. Oh my goodness, not another Batista. Oh, you don't want to work with them, they'll cause you loads of trouble. We can have these biases that are unfounded with this new person that's coming in to see you. Yeah, but implicit association tests, take it into your team, guys. Have it, try it out on some of your colleagues and see if there are any biases within your teams that actually is making your life harder, making your working life a bit more difficult, and then we can challenge it. So what I want you to think about here is, do you like the client that you work with? As I've said, you know, the one that causes you more paperwork, the one that causes you to work maybe later hours. They are more troublesome, argue a lot more, cause conflict with the other service users that you work with, and maybe they choose to engage or disengage when it suits them, it feels. And I think we can all identify those kind of individuals that we work with. But we are only human. We cannot possibly like every single person that we come into contact with. But what's important is that we are professionals with this person at all times. And if we can't build that that relationship, that therapeutic relationship with them, then this is where our professionalism comes in, and we kind of speak to a colleague, Simone, would you mind taking over, please? Because I just can't work with this person. I can't get the best results from them. This is where we have to be honest so that we can get the best outcomes. So, Mary Whittle wrote this fantastic article titled Malignant Alienation. It's an older article now, and we've known about it within mental health for a long, long time. And within mental health, it's very commonly seen with personality disorder patients. Personality disorder patients, if you're not familiar with those patients, guys, they're often seen as the more difficult patients to work with. They're more troublesome, cause more paperwork, you know, they engage or disengage when it suits them, that type of thing. But looking at this, I kind of broke it down. In medicine, the word malignant is the term referring to a condition that's dangerous to health. Alienation, the feeling that you have no connection with people around you, or that you are not part of a group. So if we play with words there, so you are not, you have no connection with people around you, or that you are not part of a group, is dangerous to health, importantly. So if we look at bias and unconscious bias deteriorating, and we start looking at the concept of malignant alienation, what Mary Whittle talks about, the term originally malignant alienation came from Morgan back in I think it was 84. But the process, as it says there, is that deteriorating relationship that we have with the clients that we work with. As I said, they are that more difficult one to like. They're more troublesome, causing more paperwork. they, you know your clients. You can probably identify somebody that fits into a kind of this kind of role for yourselves. But when you look at this article, what it tells us is that we need to try and find a common ground with the person. How can I improve this relationship with this person? What can I get to know about them? What can I share about myself with this person? And working in forensic services for all the years that I did do, I remember when I first started in forensic services, I was told very early on, don't tell patients anything about yourself. You're not allowed to tell them anything about yourself. That's just absolutely ridiculous. The second that I did that, I put up a brick wall between me and the patient that I was working with. And the responses often were, when you were trying to help this person, well, what do you know about me, Phil? You've had a perfect life. You've been to university. You've never lived in poverty or had the experiences I have. Well, yeah, I have. I used to pick out the poor box at school for a uniform. I went without meals now and again. I saw domestic abuse in their family home. So it's important that we have to share something of ourselves with the individual, so that they can see that we're human beings as well. Don't get us wrong, there were times when I worked in forensic services when a patient became agitated, and I had shared information with them. I hate you, Phil. I'm going to effing kill your wife and I'm going to rape your children. No, they weren't, because I hadn't shared, where I lived or any of that kind of information. And kind of half an hour later, they come back to us, Phil, I'm so sorry. I just, I didn't mean it. I was just angry. And this was their maladaptive coping strategies. This is how trauma and abuse and those ghosts in the nursery had impacted on these individuals. Our jobs are to try and support them to develop these new adaptive ways of coping and making the right decisions in life. But malignant alienation, yeah. When we start to lose that empathy and compassion, that compassion fatigue with the person, as it says, it's malignant. This can be passed on to other team members as well. If you're in the staff room and or out in the office and maybe you're having complaints about people that you're working with, other staff members can pick up on that, and it becomes that malignant process where we start to have these negative feelings towards an individual that we're working with. But this only deteriorates and deteriorates and deteriorates. But what is frightening about this article is that it's highly linked to suicides of patients. So we have to be careful that this isn't creeping into our practice and that we challenge it within our teams that we're working in. The last thing any of us want to be pulled into is a SAW, a safeguarding adult review. I'm sure that it is, unless it's for appreciative learning that we've done these great jobs. The last thing we want to be pulled in there is for negative kind of outcomes. So have a look at the article, folks. See what you can learn from your teams from this and how we can improve practices. I'll just try and get this kind of moving on there. The considerations to think about if we have malignant alienation within our kind of patient professional kind of life is, as I said, we lose empathy, we stop listening and hearing, we push their needs to the back of the queue, we focus on the more easier to like patients, but importantly become pernicious as well. It's that drip, a cumulative effect that drips can turn into ponds and things, can't they? And potentially it can lead to death, and we need to recognize that in our work. The other thing that I think around the malignant alienation tool, though, is that for me, it's actually a really excellent reflective tool for practice. So why don't I get on with Simone Eaglen? What can I learn about Simone that will help me like her? Why doesn't she get on with me? Can I share anything about me and my lifestyle, my hobbies, that will allow me and Simone to develop that relationship so that we can get better outcomes for Simone? Sorry, guys, Simone, for picking on you. So how can I improve this relationship to get those better outcomes? What quality information do I know about this person? So think about this bigger: religion, culture, mental health, substance misuse. For lots of years as a young person growing up, I had really quite negative biases towards I'll give you the term that I used to use: gypsies, travellers. Over in Cumbria, you've got quite a large travelling community, haven't you? That frequency in Cumbria and stuff. I've changed that because I needed to change that kind of attitude. So what can we learn about these different cultures to get a better understanding of who they are, and just get those better outcomes, but better outcomes for them and make my job easier at the same time. And one of the other things I wanted us to look at just quickly is where I've talked about ghosts in the nursery. The other thing that's really important is understanding who is this person standing in front of us. How have they got here? What has shaped their life? So we've got the ghost in the nursery. The other big thing, though, as adults, how has trauma affected this person? And I think that's so important. Obviously, most of us will probably know the ACEs study now, and the ACEs study for me, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study by Vince Felitti and Bob Anders, was the study that got me 12 years ago looking into trauma-informed care and understanding how trauma impacts on the person as they go through their life. And it impacts in so many different ways, let alone physical and psychological health and such, but it can impact on so many more things as well. So I think a brilliant book to read, guys, and some of you might have already read this, but the title kind of tells you a lot about what trauma does. So it's a book by Bessel van der Kolk titled The Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind and Body in the Transformation of Trauma. Excellent book. And just from that title, you start to get an understanding of what trauma does to individuals. I've got another slide to talk about around allostatic load, which I thought might be useful in here for you to think about the person that you're working with and why we may have biases and such towards them. So ultimately, if I can't improve the relationship, as I said, it's been professionals to say, Catherine, would you mind taking over? And that would be really helpful, and maybe we can get better outcomes. So, have any of you folks come across the term allostasis before? Anyone come across allostasis and allostatic load? So you just haven't heard of it in this way. So what we have here for ourselves and the clients that we work with, at that normal resting state, we're often really, thanks to someone, we're often really relaxed and calm. But when there's that frightening situation happens, our amygdala just goes ping, and it sends a signal to our pituitary and adrenal glands to release our stress hormones. So our bodies get flooded with cortisol and adrenaline. The best analogy I've got for this one to describe it, put your hands up using the raise your hand emoji, guys, if you have by ever chance been in a pub. Has anyone been in a pub before? I think in Cumbria there's a few people being in a pub. So, a lot of us have been in a pub. Have you ever had that feeling when you've been in a pub when you thought, ooh, we need to get out of here straight away? Anyone ever had that feeling? That is basically the amygdala in its most basic form. Yeah, we've all had that feeling, we need to leave here. And why does that happen? Because we've maybe picked up on body language, voices being raised, we saw body language changing, maybe people looking at each other in ways that we're uncomfortable with. And this is where that amygdala kind of activates, and it's that threat. It then floods the body, as I said, with cortisol and adrenaline. Now, at this heightened stage, an assault will either take place, or maybe you are really good at de-escalating a person. So when that happens, our body will flush out this cortisol and adrenaline out the system, and we'll get this return to that normal resting state. The adaptation that we see here, though, is that, think about the clients you work with, guys. How often do you think their amygdalas are activated? It's only meant to be activated every now and again during our lives. It's not meant to be activated repeatedly. So individuals whose amygdala is overactivated, they'll get that threat response, the cortisol and adrenaline will rise, and when it comes to return to recovery, they don't quite return back to that normal, lower resting state that they did beforehand. But if they are growing up in a home where this is repeatedly happening, and even into adult life, where the amygdala is always activated, what you start to see is that resting state isn't such a resting state any longer. And this is what's termed an allostatic load. They stay in this hypervigilant state, constantly on edge. And this impacts on all sorts of different things within their lives. So what you'll often see for children, and you'll see that the outcomes of this in adult life as well, it's that, as it says, overdeveloped life-preserving brain, they become hypervigilant. You lovely caring staff members, they may or maybe see us as threats to them. At school, growing up, where do you think these kids sit in class? Very back of the class, tend to be in corners so they can keep an eye on everybody else. Back of school buses, they can't listen to the teacher and take that information in because they're so focused on safety that they can't actually absorb that information from teachers. So you can see how this can be a negative spiral. And again, maybe you can start to identify some of the clients that you work with and maybe think, oh, I think Paul here maybe has an allostatic load. And I need to kind of work around this, maladaptive coping strategy to get better outcomes for him. So it's some of those things there. So reducing the ACEs, these figures are huge. I think we, as a local authority, as a health organisations, we can't get away from these figures. These figures are massive to our communities, to budgets, but to people's lives. Huge figures here. So looking at child safeguarding practice reviews and SARS, I started to see a pattern within both child safeguarding practice reviews and SARS. There are common things that we often see within SARS and child safeguarding practice reviews learning. I'll put two people on the spot and they know who they're going to be. Simone, Angela. What are the common things that we see coming out of SARS as learning?
Could be the language. We talk about people, refer to individuals who are too difficult to engage.
Yeah, and what was that? The Kate saw that came out where she was the young girl turned 18, and professionals had wrote in the notes that she was had lots of older boyfriends, sexually promiscuous and such. Yeah, she's been raped repeatedly.
Absolutely, yeah. That's what we see. We see language, biased language being used.
That came out with the Donosar as well, didn't it? Lots of victim blaming language and that difficulty to engage and putting all the responsibility back to the patient.
Yeah. The other things are lack of information sharing, lack of multi-agency working, or kind of common themes there. But for me, I believe that malignant alienation and bias and unconscious bias are there, and an awful lot of child safeguarding practice reviews and SARS as well. Just in kind of what Angela was explaining there, that kind of victim blaming language and that kind of, it's often staff client disharmony and fractious kind of engagement, but it's not written up in the terms of bias, unconscious bias, malignant alienation. And I think we need to start looking at this a lot more within our practice, folks. As I said, if we can do and challenge it, we're going to have better outcomes for the clients that we work with. We're going to make our own working lives easier by addressing this within the teams that we work with as well. Angela?
I was just going to say, just an example, I'm sure my colleagues from our safeguarding team who were also on the call, we see an awful lot when we see incidents, and I'm not picking, I'm not blaming, but we see people who've got quite significant drug and alcohol problems, who maybe present to our emergency departments. And what staff will do is they'll identify whether or not these people have got children, make sure that the children are safe, and then send the patient on the way without kind of trying to understand what is it that's caused you to drink this much today. You've actually been found by a stranger in an alleyway, and you've been brought into hospital in an ambulance. What's happened to you? We're not thinking in that terms. We're thinking like, why are you doing this? Why are you behaving like this? And not thinking what's happened to you, what's brought you to this situation today.
Absolutely. And I think I don't want to pick on A&E staff all the time, but as mental health professionals, I've done it myself, and I know a lot of colleagues have made these same kind of complaints. If we take in a service user who's a frequent self-harmer in A&E, the attitudes of staff, and we've just kind of merged with Cumbria, but over even at the RBI in Newcastle and the other A&Es over in the east of the north, is often really negative towards those self-harmers, that the wasting resources, time wasters. But you see it with police as well around substance misuse individuals. I don't know if we've got anyone on within housing or anything on the session today, but I wonder whether this can develop into kind of those types of services. I think it can. That more troublesome patient, sorry for the language, patient, that more troublesome client who is disruptive, causing trouble with other neighbours and such. Do staff lose that compassion and empathy for them? I definitely think that is something we need to look at within SARS, within teams, and improve the outcomes around this. So the ways then that I think we need to be looking at this and dealing with this is by having far better self-awareness. So that bits of reading, improving our practice discussions within our team meetings, do those implicit association tests to start trying to understand if there are any kind of biases there to start off with, personal strategies of self-care, professional strategy of working with colleagues to understand our practice, and having those open professional discussions with each other. I don't know how people feel about professional challenge, but some people can be really kind of nervous about professional challenge. I don't think there's anything wrong with professional challenge. That is just it's just having that confidence to think this is improving my practice by being able to be challenged and challenging others. We need to look at organisational strategies as well. I don't know whether we'll ever be able to decrease workloads. We only seem to be ever getting busier and busier. But if we can, but our holidays are important, that we take them, or taking our flexi leave, making sure we take our lunch breaks and stuff. But what adaptive strategies can you put in your life as well to help you cope with some of the work that you do? The other thing that I've got here is good, effective supervision is vitally important when looking at these types of issues, and that self-reflection. We've got to kind of focus on supervision, something that I think there's a lot of lip service given to supervision, and nothing really is often discussed within supervision sometimes. And I think we do need to analyse some of these topics that have maybe been mentioned today, and other ones as well that you'll come across, but reflecting on practice. And I think that's kind of where I'm at, Simone. Has anybody got any questions, any thoughts? Simone.
Thank you, Phil. That's really interesting. And I was just in the process of putting something in the chat, because I think where you finished there links really nicely back to a couple of sessions that we delivered in the morning of our conference earlier this week, where we acknowledge the impact of kind of various vicarious trauma or secondary trauma on professionals, sort of the people that you're working with and the impact that has on you. And encouraged professionals just to think about strategies for self-care and protecting themselves, and obviously seeking out that professional supervision that they need.
So important.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a really good place there to finish. So thanks for that, Phil.
No problem. I recall back in 2016, some of you might be aware of Operation Sanctuary, but it was a really huge case in the Northeast back in 2016 of exploitation, sexual exploitation of children. And I think there was something like 600 in odd victims of children and young vulnerable adults who were being raped repeatedly in Newcastle. Really quite horrific. And it was actually around this type of year that I was in the safeguarding team working through this investigation and such, and looking at notes, and I was reading about repeated rapes and abuse that was happening, and the impact was staggering. Really psychologically impacted on me, and I was quite depressed running up to the Christmas, and I really need to put strategies in to look after myself. But similarly, I remember many years ago working with colleagues in forensic services, Simone, and one colleague, such a lovely guy, who was struggling and never discussed it with anyone. And what we found one day is when we were doing the medication round, we observed him just taking some of the controlled medications and just popping them into his pocket. And what are you doing? We're just been struggling and sleeping and, you know, the work. And I had to actually walk him off the site. He was suspended instantly. He was later sacked, and he had took on these maladaptive coping strategies to deal with all this vicarious trauma that that he had been living with and hadn't discussed. So yeah, I think vicarious trauma is something in our teams that we all need to kind of, you know, take on board and look at and not shy away from.
Absolutely, Phil, and we talked about it earlier in the week, the impact of, obviously we've got colleagues here today that will be involved in SARS, being exposed to all of that detail and being involved in that, on a regular basis can take its toll on people.
Yeah. Well, the allostatic load slide that I showed everyone before, that is an important one to look at, guys, to think about workplace stress as well. So I love a good analogy. The best analogy I've got around this one is, can anybody remember Steve Redgrave?
Yeah.
For me, Britain's greatest ever Olympic champion. Won 5 gold medals across 5 Olympics. And when he retired, he became an announcer for the BBC. And they were at the regatta, and the other commentator said, Steve, it must be great not having to be down there with the lads, having to get up at 4 o'clock every morning and train. And he turned around and said, what do you mean I do? I still get up every morning at 4 o'clock and I train for 6 hours a day. And the other commentator was blown away by that. Why? What are you doing that for? He said, well, I can't stop. He says, because if I just stop, it'll kill us. I've done this for so long at such a stress and anxiety level for my body. My body's used to that now. And if I just stop, my body won't be able to cope with that. It will kill us. The doctors have told us that. And it's important for us as professionals to recognize the amount of trauma and stress that we deal with in our working lives. In my career, a lot of my colleagues who were older than us, they've already retired. Within 2 years of retirement, a lot of them are dead because of cancer, COPD, heart attacks, all these things that come up from the ACEs study in our impacts of too much cortisol and adrenaline in the system. So we need to learn, absolutely the same with police officers. So we need to learn to titrate this stress down rather than just retiring and going. Next year, I'm going down to part-time. I'm going to start tapering my days down, adding things in my life. Like I love running, gardening. I'm trying to have adaptive strategies to cope with the stress that I want to have a good retirement. And we all kind of need to put these things in place to look after ourselves. Our jobs aren't easy, guys. They're very, very stressful, and we need to look after ourselves far better.